6 people, 2 days, a lot of arboricultural equipment, and one tree that was going to come down anyway. No measurements, no testing. That was not improvisation, that was the brief. The seminar in Timisoara was not about producing new numbers. It was about taking 3 draft European Arboricultural Standards, clause by clause, physically demonstrating both proposed solutions wherever there was disagreement, making a decision, and writing the replacement wording there and then. This is exactly the kind of work that measurements tend to postpone until later. And later usually means never. The family of European standards now includes 4 documents: safety, tree climbing, tree felling and rigging, and MEWP operations in tree care. They were developed in parallel, and parallel drafting has one predictable consequence. The same issue gets written 3 times in 3 different ways. For every disputed clause, the process follows a systematic sequence. First, demonstrate the system physically. If a requirement cannot actually be demonstrated, that in itself is a finding. Second, test all the solutions under consideration, not merely the one that happens to be easiest to set up. And for every solution, consider foreseeable misuse and the consequences for rescue. Foreseeable misuse does not mean what would an idiot do. It means what might a competent person do under time pressure. Then comes the decision: keep it, rewrite it, delete it, or move it to an annex. And finally, write the replacement wording immediately, in English, using the correct normative language: shall, should, may, and can. A sentence that is not written on site is very often never written at all. And one honest statement needs to be made right at the beginning. A handful of people working for 2 days cannot approve a European standard, and they certainly cannot change the laws of physics. Anchor strength under repeated loading, the dimensioning of rigging systems, minimum approach distances from overhead power lines. None of these questions can be settled simply by standing in a tree. Those issues go onto a separate list for external technical review. It is the shortest output of the 2 days, and probably the most important one for the committee. The first session tests a requirement simply by trying to comply with it. The standard requires a written risk assessment and a rescue plan, but does not specify what either document should contain. So everyone writes their own, for this particular tree, on this particular day, without using a company template. If 2 competent arborists interpret the same clause and produce documents with completely different structures, then the clause does not adequately define the required output. And a requirement that does not define its output cannot be audited. Next, the equipment inspection chapter is tested against the equipment itself. The draft requires connectors to be self-closing and self-locking with 3 movements. But EN 362 does not classify connectors in those terms. It classifies them by type and by the number of deliberate manual actions required to open them. The text treats MRS and SRS as 2 closed categories. Reality is less tidy. There are more configurations and some do not fit cleanly into either category. So the test becomes operational. 4 different configurations, all installed on the same anchor. The second person must remain on the ground and, without touching the system, identify exactly what the first climber is suspended from. Because that is precisely the position a rescuer may find themselves in. The phrase "independent attachment of the climbing system" appears repeatedly throughout the drafts, yet nowhere is it actually defined. 2 systems running through the same anchor, the same connector, or the same harness attachment point are not truly independent. But nothing in the current wording excludes them. So 4 configurations are built, and for each one the shared component is identified out loud. A definition that cannot be applied to 4 real systems in a single tree will not work reliably in the field either. A blanket prohibition on 2 workers being in the same tree creates another problem. Technically, it makes an aerial rescue non-compliant. The proposed replacement no longer focuses on the number of people in the tree. It focuses on the actual hazards. No person may be within another worker's drop zone, within the load path of a rigging system, or within reach of another worker's cutting equipment. Work sectors, the sequence of cuts, and the communication protocol must be agreed before work begins, and confirmed again before each cut. One-handed chainsaw use reveals another contradiction. In one chapter it is conditionally permitted. In another, it appears among intolerable safety violations. ANSIZ 133 prohibits it outright. British AFAG guidance allows it only within very narrow limits, and adds one sentence that resolves most cases. Poor warp positioning is not an acceptable reason for one-handed chainsaw use. This is not a decision the seminar can close by itself. It affects both training and ETW examinations, so the final decision belongs to the committee. But the committee should receive evidence, not just opinions. The longest session of the seminar is also the one likely to influence the final standards most. 4 major questions converge here. Should a dedicated rescue line always be installed? How often should rescue and first aid scenarios be practiced? What is the correct casualty position after suspension? And is the rescue of a climber working from a ladder described anywhere at all? Four rescue scenarios are carried out in sequence. A casualty on MRS with their climbing system intact. A casualty on SRS. A casualty whose system has been damaged, requiring transfer onto the rescuer's system. And finally, the rescue of a climber from a ladder, a scenario that is not described in any of the 3 draft standards. What was written that day became its first version. That is now how the new safety standard is written. The seminar produces 9 main outputs: a register of disputed clauses and decisions, replacement wording, terminology, a definition of independent attachment, a rescue scenario matrix, age and medical fitness requirements, approach distances from electrical conductors, recognizing that a statutory protection zone is not the same thing as a minimum approach distance and that the two belong separately in national annexes. The relationship with the European Chainsaw Certificate, and the final choice of intervals for rescue practice. Every decision is recorded as one of 3 things: agreement, disagreement, or inconclusive. A standard that contradicts itself cannot be defended. A standard containing requirements that cannot be fulfilled or demonstrated to have been fulfilled protects no one. And if our profession does not write its own rules with sufficient technical precision, someone else will write them for us. And those rules are likely to be borrowed from conventional industrial rope access, a world in which the anchor point is not a living organism of unknown strength. That is why in Timisoara the drafts were read aloud, physically demonstrated, challenged and rewritten, clause by clause. In November, this material will go to the supervisors of the EAC certification centers, and every clause that remains inconclusive becomes part of the brief for the next seminar.